Would you look at this? How else would you want to end out a college basketball season but live in person together here in studio, bright and early on a Tuesday morning? It is the early line on SportsGrid. Hello and welcome to all of you. He is Donnie right side. He is right there. I am Ben Stevens. We are together live here until 11 a.m. Eastern time for the next 3 hours, recapping everything that we saw to end out a college basketball season and perhaps the most dominant two-year run we have ever seen in the history of a sport. Last night in the national championship game between Connecticut and Purdue. But as one season DRS comes to a close, we get to the very ending portion in the home stretch of an NBA regular season with the postseason on the horizon and the early goings of Major League Baseball. There is so much to get to over these 3 hours live right here on the early line.
They call it the central focus here, Ben, and what that focus was last night was on the national championship game, and rightfully so. And as Ben brought up, the NBA has an unbelievable finish to the regular season, but they took the night off last night because they also wanted to watch two titans collide last night in the national championship game. Major League Baseball all over the diamond yesterday, and today in the Northeast, 70 degrees, people? Masters?
It's starting to feel like spring. It's into the second week of this MLB season. We have just 5 days left around the association in the regular season with so much to figure out in terms of seeding for that playoff run. And, of course, as Donnie said, boom, boom, boom. The azaleas in full bloom at Augusta National Golf Club from the Final Four and the national title to Masters Week, the first major championship of this golf season. But we start with our national championship game rematch from last night, Connecticut and Purdue. Before we do that, we welcome in our SportsGrid radio audience. Hour number 1 of 3, live in person together here on the early line on SportsGrid Radio, Sirius XM Channel 159. All of our radio terrestrial affiliates now in the fold as well. He is Donnie right side. I am Ben Stevens. A story DRS that came to a close last night in this year's NCAA tournament, in this year's national championship run for Connecticut, but a story that we've really seen over the past two big dances for UConn. Their second consecutive national championship with a 75-60 dominating win once again in a national title matchup against Purdue. Connecticut easily covers as a 6.5-point favorite. A pregame total of 143.5 does stay under. Dan Hurley's Huskies go back-to-back, the first repeat national champion in men's college basketball since Florida accomplished this feat back in 2006 and 07. Dominance is the word, but what did you see out of this Connecticut team in 2024?
Just absolute dominance here, and also doing it a different way that they did, Ben, the year before. A lot of changes made. We can also equate that to South Carolina in college basketball last year, getting to the Final Four with a dominant team replacing just about every starter and winning a national championship. But also, when you're looking at the handicap yesterday of that basketball game for me, Ben, it was simple. If you thought UConn was going to win, how do they usually win? It's by double digits every single time. They did that last night. Close game in the first half, but when you saw the second half, how hard it was to score for the Purdue Boilermakers, you realized what dominance UConn has. That's back-to-back, and I know you've pointed this out multiple times this season already. It's not a normal thing. It's not like, hey, we won 3 in a row, then 2 years later another team won 2 in a row. This is rarefied air here. And also, they didn't squeak by. There wasn't any late shots here. This was a team that absolutely ripped through March Madness, and we called it. Maybe the toughest bracket you're going to see. UConn made it look easy out there.
And DRS, as you said, from when the bracket was revealed just over 3 weeks ago, we sat here on that Monday following Selection Sunday, and we looked at the East region, and we saw Connecticut as the favorites to cut down the nets for a second straight season. And we said it makes sense. They're the best team in college basketball. However, the price so short, did it make sense from a value perspective? Ultimately, it did. It is the 6th national championship for Connecticut men's basketball in program history. That ties for the 3rd most all-time alongside North Carolina. 6 in their history, only behind Kentucky, who has 8. And thanks to the John Wooden years in Westwood, UCLA leads them all with 11. But the difference for UConn, DRS, all 6 of these national championships have occurred since 1999. In the last 25 years. That is more, or that is double the amount of everybody else. North Carolina has 3. Duke has 3 in that span since 1999. Connecticut is a modern blue blood, but whatever is happening right now, there is a dynasty run occurring in store.
It's pretty awesome to watch, too, and you're right about that. This isn't a national championship where you won 6 times over 120 years or something like that. This is 25 years, and also, you put it up against the pantheon of the other institutions, Ben. You're right about that. You figure it would be Carolina, it would be Duke, it would be Kansas, it would be Georgetown. Who knows at that point? But they're running away with this race, and it's impressive to watch as it goes. Storrs, Connecticut here. Yeah. And also, this isn't like, hey, man, what's going to happen when that one coach retires? Not going to win any more national championships. 3 different coaches have won multiple championships. That is outrageous to talk about, but congratulations to UConn. An absolute wagon all the way through, and fun watching them do it. Wasn't Virginia out there like, man, just get this team off my screen. They do everything right.
A wagon is the appropriate term to describe Dan Hurley's Huskies, but they had to replace 5 of their 8 leading scorers from last year's national championship team. And you might be thinking, with how this college basketball season played out, UConn ended playing 40 games. They won the Big East regular season championship. They won the Big East tournament title, and now their 2nd consecutive national title. They were the favorites all year long. They probably were in minus money at a certain point. Not the case whatsoever. Connecticut entered the year with not even one of the 5 best numbers to win a national championship in 2024. It was 22-1 before the year got underway, but before the tournament fully got started, that plus 370 number was the favored price. And Donnie, we'll look at this 2-year run, not only going back-to-back for the first time since the Gators did so in 06 and 07, but with the most dominant 2-year run we have ever seen in the history of the NCAA tournament. A plus 140-point differential for the Huskies in this year's Big Dance. That is the most, the overall sum of a victory margin in college basketball history. In all 12 wins in their 12 NCAA tournament games over the past 2 trips to the Big Dance came by at least 13 points. Last night was a 15-point win in a national championship against Purdue. They covered in all 12 victories, a perfect 12-0 against the spread by an average cover margin of 12.5 points per game. Again, dominance is the word, but I don't think dominance truly describes what we saw out of Connecticut, the most historic and dominant run in the last 2 years in the NCAA tournament.
You're right, and so many times I talk about, like, you're going to have to win 6 games, and it's not a series. It's not 3 games, not 5, it's not 7. It's 1 game. So if you're off that night, you're probably going to get beat by another team that's very good and maybe has an on night. That's 12 straight victories now in the NCAA tournament. Yeah. They didn't have an off night. And also, facing adversity, I talk about, like, let's see what this team is made of when they're losing or they're down 5 points with 5 minutes to go. Nowhere close. Yeah. Blowing everybody out in easy fashion. A fun team to watch. Hurley's an amazing coach. In this run, look, I know sometimes people get caught up in the hype of on a day-to-day basis and what you just saw. Yeah. That's not hype. That's real for UConn.
Absolutely so. It is hard to say they weren't tested at times, but when you look at the final scores and you look at the final 20 minutes of each game, a dominant team in the second half that always pulled away, and a perfect 12-0 against the spread. Highly profitable as well. More reactions to Connecticut's national title next.
I mean, is it pretty much cut and dry that NC State is the biggest surprise of the weekend? I mean, I don't think anybody's bracket had the Wolfpack going this far.
I think they're going to find a way to keep this one close. And we all know Purdue's tournament history under Matt Painter. They've had a lot of early exits when they've been good teams, and maybe this is the time they'll exercise their demons. It's kind of like when Virginia lost to that 16-seed UMBC.
Newswire, only on SportsGrid.
The fact that I've been able to move to a home that I'm very excited about is it's really cool, and so far just love everybody that I've met at SportsGrid, and I'm just super pumped for the opportunity. Sometimes things that I wouldn't feel comfortable asking, whether it was me playing and just trying to get a tidbit on the golf course and certain thing a player might have learned. Now I'm getting that information because I don't mind asking it.
Only on SportsGrid.
89-87, 0.6 seconds remaining. Big drama here in this game. Always frustrating when your Final Four parlay and bracket gets busted, but here we go. I'm done.
Look what he is now. He's on FanDuel, plus 120. Almost even money to win the tournament. So you actually, if you did get him at plus 260, you got a pretty good, better investment than you had before. Just saying.
Sports Rage Late Night, only on SportsGrid.
Your gut says Miami is going to win, and you should take the over. Your gut also said your NFT selfies would only go up in value. They didn't. But your head is on SportsGrid and knows the QB is in concussion protocol. The backup has a 45 QBR against the zone coverage. The New York D has the most sacks in the league. So yeah, trust your head. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid.
Anyone that's been to a sporting event, the atmosphere before a game, I think Game Time Decisions has that same exact atmosphere. This is our arena. This is what we do. There is going to be an energy to Game Time Decisions that you will feel night in and night out. The excitement you get when you lock your bets in, when you're figuring out what you want to do, we can zone in on the biggest games each night. I want this to be the place that people come to before the games start so they feel as ready as possible to lock in their cards. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. We're going to go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's going to help me get the job done. There is not going to be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions to get that new information, react to it, and be able to then bet accordingly. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
Historically dominant. That is what you can say for the UConn Huskies in the past two NCAA tournaments, resulting in 2 consecutive national championships. The first school to do that in men's college hoops since Florida in 2006 and 07. We've talked a lot about UConn in the grandeur and the pantheon of college basketball, and we'll continue to do that here in this opening hour live on a Tuesday on the early line. But let's break down the game last night in the national championship out in Phoenix. It was a game, DRS, that we all really hoped for when the field of 68 was revealed. UConn, the reigning champs and the 1 seed in the East region. On the left side of the bracket, Purdue, the redemption tour, the 1 seed in the Midwest region on the right side of the bracket. When the bracket was unveiled, it was a thought, could we get to this point to see 1 versus 1? Just the 10th ever national championship game in the history of the Big Dance to be 1 versus 1 for a title on the line. Connecticut dominant once again. They win by 15 points and really started to pull away in the second half. When they led by 6 at the break, I asked our guys live on our Bracket Central set last night, DRS, is it really just a 6-point margin, or does it feel like double digits because this is UConn? Ultimately, it would be double digits for the 12th consecutive game. They cover as a 6.5-point favorite, a total that worked its way down throughout Monday afternoon into the evening hours. 143 and a hook does stay under.
Yeah, it was interesting to take a look at also because you were looking at the game flow itself and wondering how fast that tempo would be. And for myself, I said, you know what? 2 teams that don't have incredible tempo, but also at the same time, UConn can play at any tempo you want. You want to go up against Alabama, we'll drop over 80 points.
Right.
You want to play a slow-down pace, we can certainly do that. You wanted to take a look at Purdue coming into this game, knowing that they're sort of the same team. Pushing the tempo, not really their style, getting very good offensive looks because you have a balanced sheet here. 4 guards that can play and also a big man that can sort of dictate things when it goes down low. What I mean by dictate is double teams, triple teams, kicking out to open looks. It makes everybody's job so much easier. But my takeaway from the game overall itself, though, Zach Edey was phenomenal. And I always like to point out, because I did like UConn yesterday at -6.5. I did like the under in that. But I look forward to saying, well, Donnie, how did you handicap that game? I thought UConn was the better team and would win by margin. If they won the game, they usually win by double digits. But I thought Zach Edey would be slowed down. Did I think he would get 15, 14, 13 points? No. But somewhere around 20 points here would say, you know what, Klingon's going to be absolutely fantastic on defense. And he was solid. Edey was awesome last night. 37 points, 15 of 25, which included 7 of 12 from the free throw line. Then if you would have told me before the game I was going to get that type of approach from Purdue to be steady and Edey was going to dominate that way and also in efficient fashion, I actually would think Purdue's cutting down the nets today, and they were the national champion. It shows how good UConn was, but I just wanted to show respect where we were always wondering about Purdue, the outside cast for them.
Right.
But at the same time, what could Edey do against a dominant big who's great on defense? Phenomenal Edey was.
And we'll reflect on Purdue's run here in the NCAA tournament. They had to get rid of the demons. They had to exercise those ghosts from the past of being a 1 seed a season ago, getting knocked off by a 16 seed. They were trying to change a narrative in West Lafayette for this program overall. Could they get to a Final Four, something the Boilermakers had failed to do in more than 4 decades? And again, we'll reflect on the career of Zach Edey and this year's Purdue team in what this group, despite coming up short by 15 points in a national championship, means to Purdue basketball. But when you focus on the game, Dan Hurley said so after the game, and maybe he said so after Zach Edey goes off for 37 of Purdue's 60 points, but he was very cut and dry. We thought that would be the case. There was a reason we did not double when Donovan Clingan was guarding Zach Edey, and Clingan got into foul trouble. The backup reserve in terms of Samson Johnson also got into foul trouble. We saw late at the end, Zach Edey just fill up the point sheet because he was going up against Alex Caravan. But Dan Hurley made it very clear. Zach Edey is going to get his. His points prop was 22.5. He skies over with a 37-point performance. Only 10 boards, his fewest in all 6 games in the NCAA tournament for the Boilermakers. But Dan Hurley said, we know Zach Edey is probably good for 25 and 10. But if we can hold down the rest of the supporting staff, guys like Braden Smith, guys like Fletcher Lawyer, Mason Gillis, Lance Jones, and we can keep that group to 20 points or less, we are going to walk away with this national championship. And DRS, outside of Zach Edey, Purdue scored 23 points last night. The second best three-point shooting team in the country at 40.6%. At a certain point this year, at 41% from deep, attempted only 7 threes last night, and they made 1. The 7 attempted long balls from Purdue last night, the fewest in a national championship game in nearly 30 years since UCLA in 1995.
Always say it, the ultimate equalizer on the college basketball court is the ability to shoot and make three-point shots. Purdue was wonderful at that this year, over 40% as a team. That is absolutely incredible, and they had a very good shooting tournament overall. But the one thing that you anticipated coming into yesterday, I actually thought Clingan would do a better job on Edey. Again, holding him to around 20 points or so. But when you're trying to focus in and say, all right, what was Edey going to do if he wasn't double-teamed? Well, that means everybody else is going to have to work harder, and those three-point shots weren't going to be open. To take 7 of them, that's incredible, though, to take only 7, especially when you're losing by double digits throughout the entirety of the second half. The looks just weren't there, and saying, look, you take 2s, that's fine, you can't catch up, because how do you catch up? 3 straight trips down the court, 3 straight three-point shots, and away you go. Also, I do want to bring this up. The start of the second half, Ben, Clingan has 1 foul. Right away, he picks up his second foul. And if you notice, the very next time down court, you saw them banging down low, Clingan and also Edey. It looked like it could have been his third foul, wasn't called. Could have been a game changer. Right. It was still under double digits, but just the factor of how well they played. And also, I thought the refs did a pretty good job on both big guys there. We wanted to see them play. And also, if Edey was getting fouled more, he didn't show it. He was converting every single hook shot like he was Kareem Abdul-Jabbar out there. I loved watching it all the way through. But just having said that, the way that UConn said, all right, Edey, you get yours, nobody else is going to beat us. That's where you need somebody on Purdue to step up and say, I don't care if you're double-teaming him or single-teaming him. I'm going to beat my guy. I'm going to make my shots. Nobody could do that on Purdue.
And let's not mince words. Our first attention, our first focus last night was on the big man battle between the 7'4 Zach Edey and the 7'2 Donovan Clingan. Early in the basketball game, really through the duration of the 40 minutes when they were both out there, Zach Edey had Clingan's number. There was no mistake about that. But that was okay for Connecticut. It's why they did not double, and it's one of the matchups we broke down yesterday with our coach, James Young. Oftentimes, one of the reasons Purdue is so good at shooting the three is because they crash on Edey. He kicks out to an open shooter. They move the ball around, and they get a great three-point opportunity. Not the case last night, as they relied on Donovan Clingan to guard Zach Edey. Now for Connecticut, a very different story. You knew Zach Edey was baked in for 25-plus points. But one of the strengths of Connecticut is its depth and its talent. Tristan Newton, for a second consecutive year for Connecticut in a national championship game, is the Huskies' leading scorer. 20 points, 7 dimes, 5 rebounds last night. He does it all for UConn, and it's why he ended up as the Final Four's most outstanding player.
Yeah, he was very good. And again, you need running mates out here. Zach Edey technically didn't get one. UConn gave a couple running mates out there, double digits by Klingon. Obviously, you had Castle at 15 and also Newton at 20 points, and then Spencer chipped in for 11. And granted, you didn't say, boy, hopefully one of those guys gets 25 or 30 here. You didn't need it because you held Purdue to 60 points overall, so you really didn't need that offensive push. But it was great to watch it play out where everything was even distributed. Look at the 3 guys, 6 of 13, 6 of 13, and 5 and 12. Spencer, Newton, and Castle really were able to control the tempo up top. I was thoroughly impressed for UConn because, again, there's the original premise of UConn can play at any tempo and any style. They did that last night. There was no need to rush anything. They played great defense. The game plan installed by Hurley was genius. Let Edey get his. I don't think anybody else can really come over the top and get 20-plus points to carry them here. So it was a perfection night here for UConn. 6 straight wins, all by double digits. Incredible stuff to watch you play on the court, Ben.
The flexibility of it all. Look at the freshman Steph Castle. Stephon Castle in the Elite Eight shut down Terrence Shannon Jr., one of the elite scorers in college hoops. But he only had 2 points. Then he responds in his first ever Final Four as the game's leading, or at least for UConn, the team's leading scorer, 21 points. He has a quiet 15 last night, 5 rebounds and 3 dimes. The reason we included all of those stats is because everybody for Dan Hurley's Huskies contributes in a variety of facets on a basketball floor. Tristan Newton named the tournament's most outstanding player entering the tournament title game. It was plus 650. It is a Final Four award. So where is Connecticut in the grand scheme, in the pantheon of college basketball? We'll detail that next as we look forward already to next season, live right here on the Early Line.
Is it pretty much cut and dry that NC State is the biggest surprise of the weekend? I mean, I don't think anybody's bracket had the Wolfpack going this far.
I think they're going to find a way to keep this one close. And we all know Purdue's tournament history under Matt Painter. They've had a lot of early exits when they've been good teams, and maybe this is the time they'll exercise their demons. It's kind of like when Virginia lost to that 16-seed UMBC.
Newswire, only on SportsGrid.
The fact that I've been able to move to a home that I'm very excited about is it's really cool, and so far just love everybody that I've met at SportsGrid, and I'm just super pumped for the opportunity. Sometimes things that I wouldn't feel comfortable asking, whether it was me playing and just trying to get a tidbit on the golf course and certain thing a player might have learned. Now I'm getting that information because I don't mind asking it.
Only on SportsGrid.
89-87, 0.6 seconds remaining. Big drama here in this game. Always frustrating when your Final Four parlay and bracket gets busted, but here we go. I'm done.
Look what he is now. He's on FanDuel, plus 120. Almost even money to win the tournament. So you actually, if you did get him at plus 260, you got a pretty good, better investment than you had before. Just saying.
Sports Rage Late Night, only on SportsGrid.
Your gut says Miami is going to win, and you should take the over. Your gut also said your NFT selfies would only go up in value. They didn't. But your head is on SportsGrid and knows the QB is in concussion protocol. The backup has a 45 QBR against the zone coverage. The New York D has the most sacks in the league. So yeah, trust your head. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid.
Anyone that's been to a sporting event, the atmosphere before a game, I think Game Time Decisions has that same exact atmosphere. This is our arena. This is what we do. There is going to be an energy to Game Time Decisions that you will feel night in and night out. The excitement you get when you lock your bets in, when you're figuring out what you want to do, we can zone in on the biggest games each night. I want this to be the place that people come to before the games start so they feel as ready as possible to lock in their cards. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. We're going to go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's going to help me get the job done. There is not going to be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions to get that new information, react to it, and be able to then bet accordingly. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
A second consecutive national championship in Storrs, Connecticut for Dan Hurley's Huskies. A magical and dominant 2-year run in the NCAA tournament. 12 games, 12 wins, 12 covers, an average margin of victory of better than 22 points per game. An average cover margin over the past 2 NCAA tournaments of 12.5 points per game. Here in 2024, the highest point differential in a positive manner we have ever seen, plus 140. The average margin of victory this year, even better than a season ago in a national championship run. All 12 wins by at least 13 points, including their second consecutive national championship over the Boilermakers of Purdue by 15 points. 75-60, and DRS yet another cover, laying 6.5 pregame, and went under, did UConn, in all 6 games in the 2024 men's NCAA tournament.
Yeah,
We said it. Go ahead, please.
I was going to say, sometimes we just get caught up in some thoughts with, Purdue and UConn overall, how that game was going to play out, and just not overcomplicating the picture.
Right.
If UConn was going to win yesterday, I know we had a couple reels out there, which is great, which made me look smart.
Yeah.
Hey, look, if you like UConn, they're going to win by double digits, and they did that. But I can see some people out there saying, you know what? Look at Purdue, though. They haven't lost many games. When they lost games, it's really close, and Zach Edey is dominant. Anything can happen in one game, so you sort of buy into it. But UConn, just that same notion. If you just said yesterday, hey, I'm not handicapping the game. UConn kills everybody. Well, that's a terrible way. You didn't look at the numbers.
Right.
It worked out in their way in spades.
It is really fascinating, right? Purdue entered the game yesterday as an underdog only 2 times this year, and they won outright in both on the road against Illinois in early March to clinch their second consecutive Big Ten regular season crown, and in the middle of December against Arizona. That's a Sweet 16 team, an Elite 8 team in the Illini for Purdue in terms of their underdog standards. They were 5-2 against the spread as a dog in the last 2 years. Again, good at covering numbers. Was there ever a matchup advantage for anybody else in the 67 other teams in this year's field of 68 that could even keep it close enough to cover a spread against UConn? The ultimate answer is no. And it is interesting from the handicapping perspective because it almost feels too easy. All right, how do I get creative? UConn's not going to cover for a 12th consecutive game. The sample size might be there, but a trend has to stop at a certain point. And it just kept going and going and going. It's why when we saw UConn up by 6 at the break, 36-30, in a live spread at the half, DRS was 8 and a hook. I asked the guys on SportsGrid's Bracket Central coverage, is this truly a 6-point game? Or is UConn going to win by double digits, as this live number is alluding to? And that's what we saw once again. All 12 wins in the past 2 NCAA tournaments by at least 13 points. All 6 wins in 2024 by at least 14. A 14-point win in the Final Four on Saturday night against the Crimson Tide, a 15-point margin of victory in the national championship against the Boilermakers.
And fun to watch it play out, too. And also take a look at Purdue. You start that second half, and it's 6 points. And you said the 6-point really felt already like double digits. But you would have had a chance here to go in and say, you know what? It's 6 points. How about at the first time out, we make it 4 points? How about around 10 minutes, we make it a tie game? You didn't need them all back at once here, and it went the complete opposite direction. UConn came right out and forced themselves, got up double digits, and it was never looking back here. And you would have loved to have seen that adversity late in a close game down the stretch, and we could have got angry probably at a missed call or maybe a call that wasn't made. It wasn't the case here. Why? Because UConn just so dominant in that motion. They went into the halftime. And also, I got to give credit to Hurley as well. You're taking a look at a guy that every time it felt like they called a timeout, they came in with an easy bucket on the opposite end. Those are the things that separate the good coaches from the great coaches here. In the big moments here, getting your team easy baskets against a quality opponent, UConn did it all night long.
Connecticut in the Final Four trailed Alabama for the most minutes they had in the entirety of the tournament in those opening 20. They were only up by 4 at the break. They end up winning by 14 and covering as a 10.5-point favorite. Take last night's game, for example. About the 8-minute mark, Purdue and Zach Edey get a bucket. They take a 23-21 lead. The offensive pace was up. From that point, UConn goes on a 20-9 run into the opening few minutes of the first half, and they had a 9-point lead, and then it just felt like, all right, this game is already done. Even though it could be competitive down the stretch, you never really truly are able to weasel your way into a close game against UConn. So let's focus on this Huskies group, because now we have seen the first back-to-back national champions in men's college basketball for the first time since 06 and 07. As I said at the start of this opening hour of the early line, they have won 6 national championships in program history. That ties for the third most all-time in the history of college basketball. UCLA with 10 of the 11 under John Wooden, 8 by Kentucky, a lot of those in the early years of Rupp Arena, and tied alongside now for UConn at 6 with North Carolina. But the difference, DRS, is all 6 national titles for Connecticut have come in the last 25 years, since 1999. How do you evaluate the scope of where Connecticut is as a blue blood, as one of the premier programs in college basketball?
Yeah, when we take a look at the blue blood status overall, right, we usually think about old school programs, winning in the 40s, winning in the 50s, winning in the 60s, 70s, until now, which is why we take a look at the true blue blood, let's just say Kentucky.
Right.
All those championships you talk about under Adolph Rupp back in the day, and it sort of went over to Pitino and Tubby Smith, and that's a valid program today, and also Calipari getting the last one about a decade ago. But from UConn's perspective, this is the kids' blue blood program.
Yeah.
I was in college watching that 1999 championship. Oh, wow, UConn got one. They've been good for a couple of years, making Final Four runs, Elite Eights under Calhoun, but now finally punching their ticket. But to say that, it almost sneaks up on you, because when you talk about the great programs in basketball, it should be UConn, but they sort of don't come up, even though the most dominant program by a wide margin over the past 25 years. Now, you're looking at them now. They have the coach that now is a superstar and looks like he's going to be there long term. Now, I know later in the show we're going to talk about some other openings out there, but Hurley said after the game, look, I'm not going in the transfer portal. I love what I have here. And we talked about it yesterday on Moneyline, both myself and Kevin, on where Hurley might wind up. And it'd be crazy to leave. They're going to build a statue for that guy out front. But also, it's Storrs, Connecticut. It's not a major, L.A. or it's Miami or it's a, Chapel Hill where Michael Jordan played there, Duke and Cameron Indoor.
Right.
This is Storrs, Connecticut. He turned into an absolute powerhouse once again. And also, sometimes to do it, the 2 under Calhoun, the 2 under Ollie, and now the 2 under him. They do it under multiple coaches here.
Yeah, it is. It is insane, really, when you think about what they have done. And it's been a very interesting last 25 NCAA tournaments for UConn. I'm sure you've seen this stat in following the national championship game last night. They've actually missed the NCAA tournament more in the last 25 big dances than they have won national championships. They've missed it 8 times. That's 32% of the tournaments. But they have also won the title 6 times. That is 24% of the NCAA tournament. And Dan Hurley in 2020 said in his second or third year at the helm in Storrs, get us now, because I promise you, big things are coming. And he was correct. But in his first 2 years, they didn't get to the NCAA tournament. Of course, 2020, there was no big dance. In 2021, bounced in the round of 64. In 2022, bounced in the round of 64. To follow that up with 12 straight wins over the past 2 NCAA tournaments and 2 consecutive national champions. You talk about just turning the narrative on its head. Connecticut has accomplished that. And I will say this. The blue bloods in the sport are Kentucky, Carolina, Duke, Kansas. And we have seen those programs win a national championship in the last 25 years. Kentucky's got one under John Calipari in 2012. Kansas won just a few years ago. They've got 2 under Bill Self since 2008. North Carolina has 3 since 1999. Duke has 3 since that juncture as well under Mike Krzyzewski. But nobody has more than Connecticut. In fact, UConn has double the number of everybody else in college basketball. All 6 national championships for UConn have come since 1999. So are they a new blood? Are they a blue blood? What I will say is they are at the pantheon of college basketball. And maybe there's not the history and the tradition and the pageantry behind Connecticut in some thought of the term, but they are right there right now as the premier college basketball program along the biggest lights that you will see in Lexington and Chapel Hill and Durham, etc.
Blue blood, new blood, and you take a look at true blood now here for UConn. The reason why I bring that up is you have these debates, right, in the NBA. Michael Jordan and LeBron James. I love the point you just brought up because if you're a big game hunter, right, Michael Jordan gets to the finals, 6 straight finals wins, 6-0. How about UConn? Every time they got to the final, perfect 6-0 here. So whether or not they're winning during the season or missing it, you know you're going to get UConn's best shot. When the rubber meets the road, they are ready to attack. It's 6-0 in 25 years. Not, hey, we got the championship 12 times. We won 6 of them. We're 6-6. We're a great program. No, when they get there, they mean business, and they win every single time. That's incredible.
It is crazy as well because UConn since 1999 has won 6 national championships, but this year in 2023-24 was their first Big East regular season title since 1999. They were in the AAC for a little bit of time as well. Now let's pay it to Purdue just quickly here. Because it was the redemption tour all year long. Upset by Fairleigh Dickinson, the 16 seed, as they won a season ago. How would they respond? Not just in the round of 64, but could this Boilermaker group that we had not seen reach a Final Four since 1980 for a proud and storied program in West Lafayette, could this be the team to change the narrative and to flip it completely on its head? And Purdue was able to accomplish that. Their second ever national championship game in program history, their first in 55 years since 1969. Yes, they lost by 15 in a national championship game and did not look particularly good outside of Zach Edey. But this Purdue team, DRS, will be remembered in West Lafayette for many, many years to come. In fact, forever.
And they should. And quite frankly, you never probably thought this day would come in the 80s and 90s and the 70s where Indiana was the premier program in the state here. Now it's Purdue. Purdue is the premier program here because of guys like Zach Edey, Matt Painter as a coach. They did a great job this year. No shame in their game for getting to the final and losing to UConn.
Absolutely so. And we believed it for a very long time, even though Purdue was the butt of the joke. They get the last laugh into a national championship game. But UConn stands atop the hill of college basketball once more. We'll talk about it next.
Is it pretty much cut and dry that NC State is the biggest surprise of the weekend? I mean, I don't think anybody's bracket had the Wolfpack going this far.
I think they're going to find a way to keep this one close. And we all know Purdue's tournament history under Matt Painter. They've had a lot of early exits when they've been good teams, and maybe this is the time they'll exercise their demons. It's kind of like when Virginia lost to that 16-seed UMBC.
Newswire, only on SportsGrid.
The fact that I've been able to move to a home that I'm very excited about is it's really cool, and so far just love everybody that I've met at SportsGrid, and I'm just super pumped for the opportunity. Sometimes things that I wouldn't feel comfortable asking, whether it was me playing and just trying to get a tidbit on the golf course and certain thing a player might have learned. Now I'm getting that information because I don't mind asking it.
Only on SportsGrid.
89-87, 0.6 seconds remaining. Big drama here in this game. Always frustrating when your Final Four parlay and bracket gets busted, but here we go. I'm done.
Look what he is now. He's on FanDuel, plus 120. Almost even money to win the tournament. So you actually, if you did get him at plus 260, you got a pretty good, better investment than you had before. Just saying.
Sports Rage Late Night, only on SportsGrid.
Your gut says Miami is going to win, and you should take the over. Your gut also said your NFT selfies would only go up in value. They didn't. But your head is on SportsGrid and knows the QB is in concussion protocol. The backup has a 45 QBR against the zone coverage. The New York D has the most sacks in the league. So yeah, trust your head. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid.
Anyone that's been to a sporting event, the atmosphere before a game, I think Game Time Decisions has that same exact atmosphere. This is our arena. This is what we do. There is going to be an energy to Game Time Decisions that you will feel night in and night out. The excitement you get when you lock your bets in, when you're figuring out what you want to do, we can zone in on the biggest games each night. I want this to be the place that people come to before the games start so they feel as ready as possible to lock in their cards. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. We're going to go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's going to help me get the job done. There is not going to be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions to get that new information, react to it, and be able to then bet accordingly. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
Connecticut goes back-to-back for the first time since Florida. In 2006 and 07, UConn wins a second consecutive national championship. Now make that 6 since 1999. That's double the amount of even North Carolina and Duke, the next closest. Both schools with 3 in the last 25 years. 6 national championships in the past 25 NCAA tournaments. 2 straight for Dan Hurley. Where does college basketball run through? Where is that peak and pinnacle of the sport? Some would argue it is Storrs, Connecticut. But others, based on history, might say it's in Lawrence, Kansas, or maybe on Tobacco Road between Chapel Hill and Durham, North Carolina, or maybe way out in bluegrass country in Lexington, Kentucky. And even after you win your second consecutive national championship, when the big news of the past 36 hours in college basketball is John Calipari leaving Kentucky to go to Arkansas, of course, Dan Hurley was asked about that Kentucky job opening last night after winning a national championship. And here is what he had to say. Quote, yeah, I don't think that's a concern. My wife, you should have her answer that. End quote. Virtually saying, I'm staying at UConn. Now, Dan Hurley, for all Kentucky fans, is that number one potential head coaching candidate on that list. If you could have a dream candidate, it might be Dan Hurley. Now with Calipari's exit, who do you think Kentucky targets first and foremost?
Yeah, and again, just to talk about like Dan Hurley, and this is just the job of his agent, which probably is the easiest job you're ever going to have. You dial the area code up to Storrs, Connecticut. You talk to the school president before he can even say anything. He goes, how much do you want? Here's what I want. I'm going to stay here. And then Dan Hurley at the championship celebration goes, I'm not going anywhere, and I just signed a new 5-year extension here that's going to pay me as the highest paid coach in the land. And rightfully so that should happen. But there are some good opportunities here to go to Kentucky. Here's the question. Talking about Kevin yesterday on the radio, and I think it's fascinating. Like, Coach Cal is such an imposing figure to try to replace. Not because you say, well, Donnie, he only won 1 national championship. Look, it's hard to win any national championship or make runs at national championships. He got one a decade ago. But the one thing that Kentucky fans liked over the years was every year, like, talk about free agency in the NFL. When your team, forget about what they do on the field. If they win free agency, man, there's so much excitement coming up to the season, which you had at Kentucky, which every year were lottery pick after lottery pick. Eventually, you would figure that is going to work in your favor, and it didn't. So now he moves on to Arkansas. There's a big void there because when you go to Kentucky, it's not like, okay, let's rebuild the program. It's, well, we fired the last guy because he couldn't win championships. Yeah. And you know going in, that's going to be what the test is going to be. But if you don't get a guy like a Dan Hurley that walks in that situation and goes, what do you think I'm here to do? Like, lose games? Like, no, I expect to win next year. Like, okay, let's reinvigorate this fan base. You had Tubby Smith there, and then you go to Billy Gillespie. It didn't work out. That was 2 years like, look, this didn't work. We got to cut ties, and we got to pay a lot of money for Calipari to come over from Memphis. Yeah. So my question is, at this point here, that's a big-time job with a lot of money, but which coaches out there would be able to say, you know what? I like the money. I love this pressure. And I know in 3 years, if I don't at least get to a championship final, they're going to fire me.
I think it's very hard to argue that Connecticut is not the spot in college basketball at this moment, that UConn is not the premier program in college hoops. There's always going to be narratives around the teams from Duke and North Carolina, and we'll look at the odds next year. But if you are Dan Hurley and you are looking for elevation, there is only a couple of spots that really present that opportunity that could be even considered an upgrade over UConn, or at least a higher and more difficult challenge. Kentucky would be one of them. Kentucky's job, if the next head coach is successful, is not going to come open each and every couple of years. It is not a platform program. It is the end goal. It is that destination on arrival. So that's where it's intriguing for Dan Hurley. Motivationally, has he said, hey, I've gone back to back. I've done all I can here. It's the most dominant 2-year run we have seen in this sport in the last 2 decades. I don't believe so. I think he remains the head coach at UConn. But with that said, DRS, Kentucky is going to offer him a very large sum of money that ultimately, I believe, Connecticut will match in terms of that upgrade and the raise for Dan Hurley. But Kentucky has to make Hurley say no, and I believe the Cats will do just that.
Yeah, and talk about Kentucky as an NBA program in the college landscape. That's how big it is. Like, Rupp Arena is filled up with 20,000 people every single game, win or lose. They're going to get angry. That's a great and passionate fan base. You try to equate, like, some of the blue bloods of the past 25 years. You can include Villanova, right? Multiple national champions. Jay Wright, fantastic head coach. But when Jay Wright was leaving Villanova, we didn't see a lot of major national coaches go, hey, let me step into Villanova. That's an awesome program.
Yeah.
Because the program was built upon Jay Wright, and to live up to those multiple national championships at Villanova is going to be hard to do. You see what Kyle Neptune is going through right now.
Right.
Eventually, maybe he gets his grounding, but maybe not. You expected somebody to take over. That's what you're talking about, pressure at UConn, too. Like, who would they replace at Dan Hurley? But I don't think he's leaving at this point because he has something really good at this time.
Yeah.
It's a true blue blood. It's his program now. He's won 2. It's not to say, well, Hurley won 1, and the other 2 guys got 2, so he's really not the pro. Like, he feels like he's the guardian of UConn now, and he's young enough to say, I can have a legacy like Mike Krzyzewski and also maybe like a Roy Williams going over from Kansas back to his home, team of North Carolina, or even Dean Smith at that point, where you can build upon that legacy. They're going to love him no matter what, and he's going to get a grace period. In 5 years, if they haven't won a national championship or made a Final Four, they're going to be like, hey, stick around another 5 years. I know you'll get this thing back. You're not going to have that luxury at Kentucky.
We'll talk with JY about this very thing later on in our third hour. A guy that coached against Dan's father, the famous Bob Hurley Sr. in Jersey City. He knows the Hurley family has very strong ties to this portion of the country in the Northeast, which I think the geography does play a factor into this conversation as well. But I will say this, when Jay Wright bowed out, it was a shocker because he just led Villanova to a Final Four. John Calipari is one of the most successful head coaches in the history of this sport. At UMass, at Memphis, at Kentucky with a national championship. But what Cal leaves behind is a spurned fan base hoping for success with one of the strongest traditions and histories in this sport. Because Kentucky has not seen the second weekend of the NCAA tournament since 2019. 2020, there was no big dance. 2021, they didn't reach the NCAA tournament. 2022, bounced in the opening round by St. Peter's. Last year, they got bounced by Kansas State in the round of 32. And, of course, this year, bounced by the Oakland Golden Grizzly in the round of 34. And John Calipari's model has been get the most and highly talented freshmen that we can, develop them for the next level, and just hope that overall talent wins at this level. And guys like Trey Mitchell were there, and the veteran guard of Antonio Reeves. Not to say that Calipari is not adjusting to the current climate of college basketball in the transfer portal and NIL era, but it has not worked in Lexington over the last 5 years. And I think if you are Kentucky, you're okay with Cal making the move to Fayetteville because you didn't have to pay the $33 million buyout, and you can take that large sum of money and invest it on the next head coach to get that big fish out there. So if it's not Dan Hurley, you saw that potential list of candidates. We also had, during the national championship game last night, Alabama's Nate Oates released a statement that said, I am committed to this program here in Tuscaloosa, a.k.a. they just paid me a boatload of money to stay here to be the head man for the Crimson Tide. Billy Donovan, former head coach at Florida, currently in the NBA with the Chicago Bulls. He has been rumored. Scott Drew, a very successful head coach at Baylor, also should be in the mix. A couple of other SEC coaches like Bruce Pearl, maybe Chris Beard at Ole Miss are going to be in consideration. Would Pitino go back to Kentucky? Would they want him at this stage of his career? That would be a rather fascinating idea. So who do you think that next man up is in Lexington?
You have to have a pretty good profile of what you want because, like, Tubby Smith was very reserved and a very good coach and won a national championship. You take a look at Billy Gillispie, which is only 2 years, so you really didn't get a feel for that. But John Calipari, again, is a looming object there. I mean, he was the boss. It was like Pat Riley when you start to deal with the Los Angeles Lakers and the Miami Heat, like the Don of South Beach. Like, you knew who ran the show. And the question comes into is, we knew going into that meeting, right, the $33 million buyout. They didn't come into the meeting and say, you know what, John, you're my guy. Like, we want you here for like 5 more years.
No.
That meeting came together basically and said this: John, we can't fire you because we can't afford it. So good luck. And nobody wants to not be wanted, right? Even at a big program, and I have all this cachet. You want to go, and Arkansas is going to love him there because he's going to bring instant stability right away with maybe a chance to win a national championship and get a lot of high-level recruits. But Kentucky itself, you need that big personality. It's kind of crazy in a guy that doesn't translate into multiple national championships, but I think Bruce Pearl will be perfect. Kentucky.
For sure.
He's got that mindset. He can take over the crowd. He can win over the airwaves. He can bring in the talent. It's a lot of fun. Like Auburn, he resuscitated that program into a fun one.
No doubt.
Now you can level up. Now, getting back to Nate Oates, who I know a lot of people figure, like, that'd be a great move here. Alabama's on better footing to me than Kentucky is right now. Like, why would he leave and take that pressure when he is a king and has a great thing going in Alabama and gets a ton of money? Also, keep in mind, it's an $18 million buyout.
Right.
The people out there like, hey, they just avoided 30. Now they can afford to pay this. And what, pay him 8 on top? Like, no, you're going to be losing money after bringing the coaching staff and all that stuff as well. They don't just stay at Alabama, but I think Bruce Pearl is a perfect fit at Kentucky.
The investment is always going to be there from Big Blue Nation. That is zero doubt behind it. So now we look at next year's national championship odds. In college basketball, like all of collegiate athletics, starting in this next academic year is going to look different based on conference realignment. But college basketball is also going to look slightly more different because of the NIL era and the end of the G League Ignite and that idea of the best pro prospects spending their year out of high school somewhere else. Duke has 5 of the 18 top-rated recruits in this 2024 class that will all be in Durham next season, and probably some more that will return to John Shire in his 3rd year. It is why the Blue Devils are 11-1, booked as the national championship favorites for next season. Kansas, second best number at 12-1. UConn, the 2-time now reigning national champs, at 15-1, alongside Alabama, North Carolina, and Houston. Arizona at 20-1. And then there is a group of 5 teams at 30-1, tied for that 8th best price, including Purdue and Rutgers, because of all the talent that the Scarlet Knights are bringing in next year's freshman class. You saw Kentucky at 30-1. I wonder what that number looks like when they solidify the head coaching position. And you also might have saw Arkansas at 40-1, but they're off that top 10, so a little bit back. Arkansas now has John Calipari, who understands that he needs to win. And the Razorbacks did not reach the NCAA tournament this year under Eric Musselman, but they had been to the Sweet 16 in the last 3 at the very least, and 2 berths in the Elite 8. They are not Kentucky from the blue blood distinction. They don't have the history of the Cats. But Arkansas is a very talented basketball program, and Bud Walton Arena is one of the most electric atmospheres in all of the sport. So what do you think John Calipari does in his first year in Fayetteville? And maybe more importantly, DRS, what should the expectation be for Cal, now the head coach of the Hogs?
I mean, you hire a guy like that, the expectation always should be national championship. We have to be honest with ourselves. We don't know the complete status of that team, who's going to be on the team next year, and also implementing your game plan and also the structure of your program. But we know Calipari in year number 2 is going to be expected to take 5 out of the top 20 players in the nation, sell them on, you'll be an NBA player at the end of the season. That should be good enough here. So expectations next year for me is making the tournament. After that, it goes right back to why you hired him. Arkansas didn't hire Calipari to say, let's sell tickets. You brought it up yesterday. Bud Walton Arena is one of the best environments in college basketball and should be a lot of fun. It wasn't a ticket seller. It's like, now you need to take us to the next level. Olin Richardson back in the day, who was able to do that with a championship over Duke in the final. I'm interested to see what he does. But next year, you got to make the tournament. Then it's right back to, Cal, you better start winning championships here.
Cal, you better get us to a Sweet 16, something you failed to do in the last 5 years at Kentucky. Some very intriguing numbers that we will see already for college basketball this upcoming season. But we've got a lot of time to break down next year. One thing we will do to round out this opening hour is look at the women's game at its pinnacle, at its inflection point as we move forward to 2024-25 next.
Is it pretty much cut and dry that NC State is the biggest surprise of the weekend? I don't think anybody's bracket had the Wolfpack going this far.
I think they're going to find a way to keep this one close. And we all know Purdue's tournament history under Matt Painter. They've had a lot of early exits when they've been good teams, and maybe this is the time they'll exercise their demons. It's kind of like when Virginia lost to that 16-seed UMBC.
Newswire, only on SportsGrid.
The fact that I've been able to move to a home that I'm very excited about is it's really cool, and so far just love everybody that I've met at SportsGrid, and I'm just super pumped for the opportunity. Sometimes things that I wouldn't feel comfortable asking, whether it was me playing and just trying to get a tidbit on the golf course and certain thing a player might have learned. Now I'm getting that information because I don't mind asking it.
Only on SportsGrid.
89-87, 0.6 seconds remaining. Big drama here in this game. Always frustrating when your Final Four parlay and bracket gets busted, but here we go. I'm done.
Look what he is now. He's on FanDuel, plus 120. Almost even money to win the tournament. So you actually, if you did get him at plus 260, you got a pretty good, better investment than you had before. Just saying.
Sports Rage Late Night, only on SportsGrid.
Your gut says Miami is going to win, and you should take the over. Your gut also said your NFT selfies would only go up in value. They didn't. But your head is on SportsGrid and knows the QB is in concussion protocol. The backup has a 45 QBR against the zone coverage. The New York D has the most sacks in the league. So yeah, trust your head. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid.
Anyone that's been to a sporting event, the atmosphere before a game, I think Game Time Decisions has that same exact atmosphere. This is our arena. This is what we do. There is going to be an energy to Game Time Decisions that you will feel night in and night out. The excitement you get when you lock your bets in, when you're figuring out what you want to do, we can zone in on the biggest games each night. I want this to be the place that people come to before the games start so they feel as ready as possible to lock in their cards. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. We're going to go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's going to help me get the job done. There is not going to be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions to get that new information, react to it, and be able to then bet accordingly. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
The 2023-24 college basketball season is now in the books, but it is never too early to look forward to next year. We showed you the national title odds for men's Division I college basketball, but really the moment is for the women. A sensational and historic and potential inflection point in women's college basketball during the 2024 NCAA tournament, capped off by 18.7 million viewers tuning in for Sunday afternoon's national championship game between Iowa and South Carolina. Of course, the most watched women's basketball game ever, but the most watched college basketball game since 2019. More watched than any NBA game since 2017 or any Major League Baseball game since 2019. 18.7 million viewers. Absolutely outstanding. Who saw South Carolina win its third national championship in the past 7 years, its second in the past 3, and a dominant run and a perfect and undefeated season at 38-0. And you're not going to get the discount on South Carolina DRS that we saw prior to 2023-24 when they had to replace all 5 starters. Now they have a lot of returning talent in Columbia. Don Staley and the Gamecocks will enter next year as the favorites, plus 145.
And rightfully so, but I am going to take a flyer probably on UConn at that plus 450 price. The reason being is we know they don't have to reload. They're already loaded. And if Beckers is healthy for the entire season next year, another year off of that knee injury, they're going to be a very good team and to watch out for. But who can you trust? Who do you trust more than South Carolina, though? Every single year. Dawn Staley is an unbelievable coach. They are going to reload for next year. Let's get something straight here, Ben, right at the top. Almost 19 million people, right? If a World Series game played at 3 p.m. on a Sunday, you know how many people would watch? NHL, you know how many people would watch? The NFL doesn't play at 9 o'clock. I mean, play these championship games in the middle of the afternoon on Sunday. We'll all benefit from it. All of us, Ben.
Commissioner right side. A couple of other prices to keep an eye on. USC has Juju Watkins returning at plus 950. You don't see Iowa there in the post-Caitlin Clark era, but I promise you this, the Hawkeyes are still going to be good in Iowa City. Hour 2 starts in less than a minute here on the early line.